Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Ross, Virginia. I'm a professor in the Environmental Studies program, and it's my privilege to direct the Institute of Arctic Studies here at Dartmouth, which is part of the Dickey Center for International Understanding. And I want to thank right off the bat some colleagues in the anthropology department, Sienna Craig and Ken Bauer, for helping draw and bring Gretel here to us today. And I want to thank Lee McDavid from the Institute of Arctic Studies for pulling all of this together. She's done an amazing job in organizing all the events that Gretel's participating in over today and tomorrow. So really, it's a privilege to introduce one of America's greatest writers, Gretel Ehrlich. And you're here because you know about her writing. You know, here's the count quickly. There's 15 books of nonfiction, fiction, poetry, the familiar titles to many of us: The Solace of Open Spaces, Heart Mountain, This Cold Heaven, The Future of Ice, Facing the Wave. And all of these books have won awards of different kinds from different constituencies and stakeholders. The first ever Henry David Thoreau Award for Nature Writing, the PEN USA Award for Nonfiction. She's won Guggenheim's, National Geographic support for her travels to the north and other places. And then many pieces in magazines, New York Times Magazine, Harper's, Orion. So her work is very familiar to us, but it takes many different forms, and I think that's one of the magical pieces about her work and her writing. Gretel Ehrlich was born on a horse ranch near Santa Barbara, and she was educated at Bennington College and also at UCLA Film School. We had a really nice discussion this morning at breakfast about the amazing environment that Bennington was at that time, and a special place for creativity and for artists and writers. And I think that Gretel benefited very much from being there and has helped change Bennington itself. I think most people are aware of her history and a very life-changing event. In 1991, she was struck by lightning, and a long period of disability and recovering. And coming out of that, I think she had the urge to travel. And she first took a trip to the Himalayas to look at that environment and the people and understand the vulnerabilities of that mountain culture and the change that was happening in the mountains. But also in that same year, she traveled north to Greenland. And I think this began a long-running, I'd say, romance and a very challenging relationship with understanding Greenland and the people of Greenland and the profound changes that are happening there. And some of them difficult to watch, but all of them important to understand and to learn about. So she's going to be talking about Greenland today, and so we'll hear more about that. Dartmouth has, I'm going to highlight Dartmouth's connection to Greenland. Dartmouth has a long tradition of working in Greenland, especially over the last 10 years. At the current time, we have 2 Dartmouth graduate students working in the tundra near Kangerlussuaq. We have a group of Dartmouth students and faculty who are actually on a traverse from the edge of the Greenland ice sheet up to summit to measure, Bob Hawley and that group, to measure snow accumulation and melt. And as a scientist, it's an amazing place to go. Dartmouth has formed good and close relationships with people in Nuuk, the capital, the big city of Greenland, people at the university, people in the government. But what none of us have had the opportunity and the gift to be invited into the far north of Greenland, to become part of the family of a subsistence community, people that are living in very amazing ways, closely connected to the land, to animals, to the environment, to the weather. These are experiences that the only way we really, most of us are ever going to see or understand is through Gretel's writings and other people that have been there and translated that experience to us all. I met Gretel in 2013. I was there as a faculty lead with a group of about half a dozen PhD students from different departments at Dartmouth. And we were in Ilulissat, Greenland. That's the outlet of the Auditorium Glacier. This is the fastest flowing ice sheet. This is where the giant icebergs crash into the ocean. This is the site of the UNESCO World Heritage Ice Fjord. And while we were there, we ended up at our Arctic Hotel, a very elegant hotel, and we had dinner. And she was there with her husband, Neil Conan, Talk of the Nation, NPR. And Connie Steffen was there. Connie is probably the world's leading glaciologist studying Greenland. He's been doing this for about 30 years. And we had an absolutely delightful dinner, a very long, slow dinner, a beautiful dinner, a challenging dinner. And what we talked about most was about how Greenland was changing, but we also talked about how Greenland was changing us. And so I think we have a very special opportunity today to learn a bit more about a place that almost none of us will get to. And the way we're going to learn about Greenland and experience the amazing place, but the people of Greenland, the hunters, the people who are surviving in the north and being challenged by climate change driven by us and our lives, people in the south. So we're really happy to finally have Gretel here in 2013. We made a pact at that dinner that you would come to Dartmouth. It's taken us a while to get there. And we hope that now that you're here, we can get you back again. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Gretel, and we're going to learn about Greenland and we're going to share that experience. So welcome to Dartmouth.
I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for everybody who brought me here. So I think it's important to put a human face on the changing climate, because we hear a lot of science, but it's hard to calculate, hard to calculate what that really means. Well, it's... Okay, she's turning it up. Yeah. So it's important to have a human face on climate change. So it will connect us to what's happening. We can imagine our lives as climate affects all of us in a different way. So I'm going to tell stories from my 20 years of travel in Greenland with this amazing extended family group who were kind enough to let me just travel on the dog sled with them wherever they were going. They call me the boss because I never asked to go anywhere to do anything. I just said, "Where are you going?" "Okay, can I come with you?" And so they liked it that I wasn't bossy. We have some technical problems here. Okay. Not long ago, there was ice as far as you could see. "Pukwuk, pukwuk, pukwuk, a-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta." Jens called out to his dogs, "Go faster, go on, go faster." We were traveling on sea ice. Connacht was behind us. "Town is poison," the hunters always said. And we were happy to be on our way. The freight sled was big, 12 feet long, 4 feet wide, our load strapped on top and us sitting on top of that. We were pulled by 15 dogs. We traveled without talking. We wore polar bear pants and fox fur anoraks, sealskin kamiks, boots. I'd arrived alone in this northwestern village, in most northwesternmost village in the world a few days earlier. And for the next 20 years, I often traveled with no translator, no common language. Now, La Mer de Glace, as Knut Rasmussen called it, spread out before us. Ahead were two islands, Kirkitasuak and Kiatok, and beyond were mirages that looked like islands, but weren't. At 77 degrees north, the sea ice had come in as usual in mid-September and would not go out until mid-June. This was 1997, and in this food-sharing society, every human and every dog had enough to eat. And the populations of ringed seals, walrus, narwhal, polar bears, ravens, Arctic foxes, Arctic hares, the visiting ducks and auks was robust. Ice mountains and cliffs of rock slid by. The ice floor, the Inuit highway, rolled under us. Sometimes the snow-free ice was a mirror. Other times, snow piled up like a felt robe. Radiant sun shone through bursting snow squalls. The silver line at the horizon melted and became a line of blue. We were alone in an unending ocean of light. But then I heard something breaking, like a goblet being smashed, I grabbed for something to hold on to, wedging my gloved hand under the lash rope. What happened next, I'm not sure. I saw dogs disappear, dogs falling through broken pieces of ice, I think of it as glass, smashing into water, then big slabs of upended ice bobbing back up. Jens stretched forward, lying over the trace lines, and with one hand started pulling the dogs out of the water. The sled was slowly inching towards the ever larger hole. When the dogs were out, Jens stepped off the sled onto a piece of ice that was sinking. He's a big man, and it was sinking fast. And he lifted the front of the sled that must have weighed, 300 or 400 pounds, and dropped it down on a piece of ice that looked firmer. He jumped aboard, yelled at the dogs to go fast, and undaunted by their swim, they took off. The past is fiction. The future is dream. I knew better than to try to establish a firm floor under myself, and yet I did. We weren't talking about melting sea ice and collapsing ice sheets then. This was 1997. We were just trying to get our footing that day. But I felt lost, like an eye that had flown out of a head, falling through the world. What I didn't know then was that we had just experienced the beginning of the end of ice, and the losses would be great. The loss of Arctic animals, the loss of a whole ice-evolved worldly culture, the loss of a traditional hunting life so carefully insisted upon by these northern hunters who had banned snow machines, travel only by dog sled, wear skin clothes, and make everything they use by themselves. Kayaks, dog sleds, harnesses, whips, spears, all ice age equipment made in a 21st century communal workshop. These were people who elected to continue working from and be inspired by an atavistic collective memory of all that had come before, of lifeways and a way of knowing the world. They were still fluent in Greenland's 3 dialects, as well as in the old songs and vocabulary known only by shaman. Against all odds, they made sure their culture was intact and stayed that way. Ice is always moving, deforming, melting, coming back to life, just like the human mind. And people who have co-evolved on ice are agile in body and their thinking. My friends can jump from one piece of drift ice to another and understand that life is transient, chance, and change. They live happily in a world of extremes, 24 hours a day of light and 24 hours a day of darkness, each 8 months of ice that gives way to 4 months of open water. Their permeable world included animals that could become human. They told stories of spirits who lived on the ice cap with dogs' bodies and human heads, of orphans who became shaman, of bears who understood everything that humans say and still do. They have a remarkable ability to survive, not stopping to think, but acting directly and remembering to be modest in front of the weather. That day in 1997, out on the ice, I saw water squeeze up inside the paw prints of the dogs as we made our way out toward Kiatok. Not a good sign. When I asked Jens if we were going to die, he said, "Imaka, maybe." Not because he's fatalistic, but because he knew how quickly things can go wrong in the Arctic. Jens and I were drenched. On the moving dog sled, we changed into dry hammocks, but the falling dogs, the sound of ice breaking kept going through my head and still does today. It came to signify the death spiral of a singular and ancient culture that stretches from the northeast coast of Siberia all the way across the polar north to Greenland. One language, one set of myths, one way of life. And without knowing it, we had entered a new world. Satellites have been telling us that the ice had been thinning since the 70s, and we all know that humans have been altering climate since they began burning forests and grasslands long before the industrial revolution, but no one had quite envisioned what was to become. Unimaginable changes have taken place since then. We've been careless, underestimating the sensitivity of the ice planet. All this time we've been walking on its skin, spilling our greed and waste all over its body, and have failed to take stock of what we are doing and why. There's nothing that can be done to stop global warming, Julian Dowdeswell, the head of glaciology at Cambridge University, said. I met him on a plane with a whole load of glaciologists. All we can do is deal with the consequences. 2000. I'm flying over a sun-combed ice cap of incomparable beauty, the cracked elbow of its outlet glacier bending and dropping down the face of a rocky cirque. What was once a long-held breath of winter when no open water showed except for Filene is now riddled with long stretches of open water, sparkling eye slits cuffed by rising waves of mist that only hold in more heat. There's a moat of turquoise around a sun-battered iceberg, smooth ice and broken water. Narrow straits and wide bays are striated with the uncombed hair of rotting ice. In wide areas between the village of Savissavik and Ellesmere Island, there's no ice at all. When I arrived in Connacht this time, Gideon, one of Jens's brothers-in-law, had gone out on the ice hunting, even though they had warned him not to. He was standing beside his dog sled when the ice broke away. He started drifting. Someone in Connacht saw what had happened and called Thule Air Base. Gideon drifted and drifted. Then the piece of ice he was on broke in half. He cut the dogs loose from the sled. The sled and all his gear disappeared in the water. He held the 10 dogs close to his legs. Finally, the helicopter arrived and pulled him up. And just as he got inside the helicopter, he saw the piece of ice he was on had melted. Since then, I've had a recurring dream. Gideon is walking around carrying a huge pane of ice by a leather handle. He wanders over miles of rotting ice, trying to find a place to lay it down. But each time he tries, his piece of ice touches water and begins to melt, so he lifts it and keeps walking. I see him way in the distance, the pane getting smaller and smaller and smaller and melting away. 2004. There were 8 of us, 4 sleds and 58 dogs, going out for a month-long walrus hunt. It was March, the second coldest month of the year, and the temperature was 30 below zero Fahrenheit when we started out. The day was bright and still, but everywhere I looked, there was hikuliak, new ice, so thin it undulated under the sleds. Jens says, there is almost no more old ice, ice that never thaws. It's all hikuliak and salty, hard on the dog's feet, and it can melt very fast. Dangerous to be going out on it, but we were. When I first came to Greenland, the ice was routinely 10 to 12 feet thick. That year, it was 7 inches. The hunters needed food for their dogs and families, and were excited about going out to Saunders Island, a place they called Walrus El Dorado. After traveling all night, we made camp. Now we are coming into some good country, Gideon crooned. We walked single file to the ice edge, trying to make as little noise as possible so as not to scare off the walrus, who have very sensitive ears. The ice was so thin, it was rubbery, and it rolled under our feet. At the ice edge, we saw eider ducks flying in, and a pod of beluga whales swim by, but no walrus. Back at camp, we drank instant soup and went to bed. Before we woke, Mamret went out to the ice edge alone and harpooned a walrus. The cold intensified, yet the ice at the headlands kept breaking. We traveled all day and found refuge in a tiny hut they use when necessary. By the time we started unpacking the sleds, Jens said, It was 50 below Celsius, which means 59 below Fahrenheit. Patches of frostbite covered our faces. The dogs lay on snow-covered ice, nose under tails. But at least we had meat. A single Primus stove, the old kind, was used for both cooking and for heat. In Greenland, dogs and humans eat the same food, but the dogs are fed first. They're trained to sit in a line and wait until a chunk of meat is thrown to them. This way, there are no fights. We were happy to huddle in the hut, lying nose to nose on the illic, the plywood platforms where you put your bedroll. Mamret talked about his love of polar bears. He said, "The polar bear is its own weapon. He taught me how to get out of the ice if I fell in, climbing out sideways, one arm, one leg like this. He has many times saved my life." But when Jens spoke, everyone fell silent. In a soft voice, he said, "I was in the tent when my dog started barking. I grabbed my rifle and ran out. A polar bear was standing on a little hill of ice. I shot at it, but it didn't fall. When the bear turned to me, I saw it had a human face, and it was beckoning to me. In earlier times, I might have become a shaman, but not now. It's too late. To have followed the bear would have been leaving my family and community, and I can't do that now. So I told him to go away." Ice shapes the mind. In Greenland, weather, cold, hunger, isolation was the forge on which imagination was honed. E.O. Wilson talks about our innate longing for the savanna. But for polar people who are unacquainted with green, ice and a white cover on earth is the comfortable place in their dreams. Ice is the mirror in which they see where their food is coming from, and also their own psyches. One autumn when Jens and I were traveling on bare ice, it was September, and no snow had fallen, he said, "It's not easy living on a mirror. You can't go along on your dog sled dreaming. You have to be awake. You have to be iliamuak, wise about things, because the ice has come to teach us how to see." The first word I learned in Greenland was sila, S-I-L-A. It means simultaneously weather, the power of nature, and consciousness. Not just human consciousness, but animal, river, ice sheet, ocean, mountain consciousness. Back to 2004. When the temperature on that walrus hunting trip rose to 30 below, we felt kind of warm and traveled on to a village called Moriasak. From there, we would travel over the edge of the ice sheet, a difficult 5-day trip, a really difficult one, and go out to Saunders Island, make camp for 2 or 3 weeks and hunt walrus. But in Moriasak, we were told there was no ice at all. This is down south, and we couldn't see it because of a headland. The hunters were shocked. We turned back eventually. Already, the ice was breaking up on much of the route we had just traveled, as if to say, everything behind you is now in ruins, and you can't really go home. We had to go up and over the edge of the ice cap. The way was steep. The dogs eyed the open crevasses on either side of the sled nervously. You know how dogs are kind of like going like that, as I was too. At the top, we took air, careening off a cornice and shot down a narrow, rocky stream bed. Jens put a piece of rope under the runners as a brake, but still we were going way too fast, and he pushed one leg out onto the snow to help slow us as we slalomed between boulders to the bottom. A ground blizzard overtook us. Once again, we retreated to the tiny hut. We cut off pieces of walrus for the 58 dogs and more to boil for ourselves. By the time the storm let up, we were running out of food. In fact, the entire walrus was gone. We followed a small fjord inland, clinging to shore-fast ice. The hunters were thrilled when they saw someone had left meat on a drying rack. That's the way things are here. At least the dogs would eat, while we stirred hot water into cups of soup. The next 2 weeks, we lurched across bad ice, rotten ice, barely making it out to Keotok Island. Steep and mountainous, we followed an ice foot around the island. And when it broke completely off, we had to jump the dogs, then push the sleds 14 feet down onto rotting pans of ice, hook up the dogs again, and go fast, leaping over patches of open water. Finally, we headed for home. We tried to go north, but that didn't work either. Everywhere there was broken ice. Jens looked out over the barely frozen sea. He's a modest man with special powers who rejected the impoverishment of materialism for a life out on the ice and the natural communalism of an Inuit village. He said, "The ice is not happy that the weather is going against it. I look and don't see the ice wanting to come back. Please tell me, whose weather is this? It's not mine. If we lose the ice completely, it will be a disaster. Without ice, we are nothing at all." Climate is culture. Is it possible that we haven't fully comprehended that life as we have known it is in danger, that we may die off as a species out of carelessness? The year 2007 was the hottest on record. Average Arctic temperature jumped 13 degrees Celsius. That was the year I was sent all the way around the world by National Geographic to talk to and travel with indigenous Arctic people and find out how they were being affected by climate change. In Alaska, I traveled with Joe Sanungatuk, a famous family there, and we spent a week in Wales, where he was born. It was 50 below when we arrived, and polar bears were wandering through the village, already hungry. Joe made kupiak, coffee, and began remembering the old days. He remembered a boyhood where nothing was lacking. Before white people came, he said, we had everything we needed, and what we didn't have, we made. He remembered eating fresh walrus breast, part meat, part milk. He remembered dances that lasted a month. Time, he said, was a fabrication created by missionaries to get us to go to church and school. We didn't need that. Things we had been living without for thousands of years and thriving, we didn't need them then. He remembered the ghost who lived in the family shed. She was a neighbor lady who sat in the corner chewing tobacco and sewing walrus hides. He remembered the whalesman who fell in love with a woman up the coast and used a piece of drift ice as transportation to visit her. He said the currents and wind was predictable then. He knew the ice would take him to her. He described King Island, a plug of granite sticking up out of the ocean where one-room houses were cantilevered out from vertiginous cliffs, one above the other. The walls were covered with walrus hides and roofed with whale bones. He remembered a person on Little Diomede Island who became a walrus. When that walrus person returned to live among humans, he found he could no longer stand their smell. So he lived alone at the edge of the village. Joe said, maybe I'm a bit like that now. Not repulsed, but apart. Not of this century, but not of the old times either. Joe's friends came to visit. A whaling captain named Luther came in the middle of the night and woke us up with urgent things to say. We try to take care of our future by using our past, he said. That's an unknown concept to most kids these days. We try to push them in the direction of tradition because that's all we have here. Wales was a radical place when white men first arrived, radical in the knowledge it took to survive here. Now everyone is having problems with ice. There's either too much or not enough. You can hardly forecast the weather the old Inupiat way. Barrow people are seeing narwhal up there, never had them before. Summers are hot. We have dragonflies and robins and porpoise, sharks and orca. Real strange. It'll come a time when the migrations of eider ducks, walrus, and whales get so mixed up that they'll come at the wrong time in weather. The wind currents and the coming and going of the ice will go against them. See, it's not just here that we're concerned with. What happens here with the ice affects everywhere. That April, I traveled for a month with nomadic reindeer herders in Arctic Russia, just below the Barents Sea. They were an ethnic band of 14 people called the Komi, K-O-M-I. We traveled from the deep snows of the taiga to tundra that bordered the Barents Sea on sleds pulled by 2 reindeer, and behind each of them 7 more sleds carrying everything they owned. They said, "We never had a permanent place, never lived in a house, but there are only a few of us, and the men can't find wives. No one wants to live this way anymore." The Komi world is made of reindeer. They sleep in huge teepees made of reindeer hides sewn together, wear reindeer clothing, sleep inside reindeer bedrolls, and eat reindeer 4 times a day. We had to cross a large and deep river to get to the next pasture, but found the ice there had already broken up and it was impassable. The animals had cuts on their legs from breaking through ice. The tiny frozen melt ponds we'd crossed at the beginning of the month had all thawed. Methane bubbled up from them. They said, "Our land is melting. The bugs are so bad they drive the animals mad. Our way of life is sinking down." When I returned to Greenland, there was no ice at all. A little shore-fast ice, but the rest was open water. Pauline Simiak from Siopperlook said, "We are not so good in our outlook now. It is dangerous on the ice. Around here, it's all depression and changing moods. We are becoming like the ice." In Moriasak, we heard that everyone had moved away. Only 2 were left, and they went out hunting one day in a boat. A loaded gun went off by mistake, and one of the men was killed. In anguish and loneliness, the man that was left killed himself. Moriasak is no more. The Arctic is shouldering the wounds of the world, wounds that aren't healing. By losing ice, we are risking a heating scenario that will ravage our lives. We are losing diversity, biological and cultural. Traditional ecological knowledge is transmitted generationally. Now the young people in Greenland are being sent south to learn a trade. The villages are being deserted. Soon the language will be lost, those words that told a young person just learning to be a hunter where to find the walrus and how to behave when they got there. Diversity is a condition of life. Without it, we devolve, we fail to thrive. 2012. Climate is culture. The next time I returned to Greenland, it was clear that once sea ice decay had become rampant, the thread of culture had unraveled too. I went to the ice edge with Mamre and his brothers because Jens was away. Though there was ice, it had come in late and would melt quickly. Nothing was the same. Hunters in Connacht were shooting their sled dogs because there was nothing to feed them, and they couldn't afford Danish dog food. Though there was 2-foot thick ice when I arrived in May, it had come in late and would melt. Gideon and Mikele were able to harpoon 2 narwhal, but the mood was not jolly. No jokes, no laughing, no smiles at bringing food home to their families and dogs. I asked about the children in Connacht who would normally have been raised to become hunters, and they said they've all been sent south to South Greenland, to vocational schools. They're being told to leave. A group of Connacht hunters arrived and made camp right behind us. It's bad practice to usurp another family's hunting territory. I saw that the old courtesies were disintegrating along with the ice. The next morning, a dogfight broke out at the intruders' camp, and an old man viciously beat one of the dogs. I'd never seen cruelty to an animal in Greenland before. I started to run over to stop it, but Mamret grabbed my arm. "Don't go there," he said. "They might hurt you too." We left the next morning, deeply upset. The ice edge had already begun to get soft, and it would have been dangerous to stay anyway. On the way home, Mamret got tangled in the dog harness and was dragged for a long way before I could get the dogs to stop. Usually nimble, his fall broke my heart. It stood for the unraveling of this extraordinary way of life that had thrived in the harshest climate for thousands of years. And I wondered if I would ever travel with these men again. Later that summer, I heard that Otto Simiak, one of Siaperlik's greatest hunters, was seen motoring south on a tiny boat between melting icebergs. His wife had left him. His 2 sons were in the south. Siaperlik, once a vibrant subsistence village of 65 people, had only 2 residents left. When I asked one of them how he would survive, he said, "Perhaps just on beauty." While the villages of northern Greenland were emptying out, the Greenland ice sheet was melting. Surface melt ponds were becoming huge lakes, sluicing down moulins. Meltwater rivers big enough to hold VW buses were bubbling out at the calving front. The subglacial lakes discovered just north of Connaught were filling and draining so fast as to imply that the entire plumbing system of the ice sheet was in jeopardy. The oceans had heated up, and at the edges of both poles, warm water corrupted the tongues of marine glaciers so they snapped off or slid. Masses of ice, masses of land, mountains and rivers are changing, shifting. There are ice quakes in Greenland. A piece of the Petermann Glacier, big as Manhattan, chipped off the northwest side. Now Zachariah Eastbray on the northeast side has slipped. With Operation Ice Bridge, we can peer at a 3-dimensional map of the ice sheet's many layers as if we could see into our own demise, because the Arctic rules the climate of the whole world. Traveling on the sea ice in long days that had no nights, the horizon splintered. It shimmered and shifted and blinked out, then appeared again, a silver line that beckoned. The eye goes the entire distance, and as we moved toward it, what looked like the end kept moving, enlarging, becoming a possibility. Our minds widened, the sea ice under us moved. Yet we're always trying to freeze space, to make it our own, to solidify our identities, to say, this place is mine and this is who I am in it. Alaskan dance masks show that we are not singular, that the Inuwa, the soul of a seal or a bear, can be seen within a wolf's head or a human's. In the same way, the ice cape deforms, melts, reforms, disappears. The apron of permafrost that wraps around the top of the world is melting and outgassing methane. 1,000-meter wide plume of methane was seen maybe 5-7 years ago coming out of the Laptev Sea. Now it's bubbling up everywhere, and the tundra is collapsing. As ice melts and retreats, polar bears are coming onto the land. I just spoke with George Devoki, who studies black guillemots on Cooper Island, and he said their chicks have been starving because the mothers have to fly 250 miles out to get food. And there are polar bears. He used to be able to go anywhere on this tiny island, and now he has to have an electric fence around his little shack to keep the polar bears away. The jet stream has gone wobbly. It looks like a river crossing a floodplain. It wanders and stalls. Water vapor is now the most prolific greenhouse gas. The perturbations of colliding systems, heating oceans, meltwater from the ice sheet, stalled storms, extreme drought, and complex ocean-atmosphere exchanges make for conditions that are not just unpredictable, but exuberant and terrifying. These days, I'm not calling it climate change, but climate strange. The 2016 winter Arctic sea ice extent has hit a record low. We have to stop pretending that there's a way back to the interglacial paradise we left behind. And though the changes ahead may seem incomprehensible, we are on that path, one foot in front of the other. As Atu Matu, an Arctic rapper from Kaktovik, Alaska, sang when we were all in Paris together for the climate conference, she sang, "I am an ancestor of the future. Why is it so hot here?" We have to allow ourselves to be frightened, to care, to adopt a sacred point of view in which the view and the viewer are both sacred. I'm not talking religion here, but an ever deeper intimacy with ground, ice, air, water, with sila. Only then do we dare proceed. The world is its own magic. We need to develop more tenderness towards life, what's left of it, toward otherness. That's when life gets exciting, when I am not I. The Japanese word oku means the deep interior of the mind, the hidden secrets of a place. We need to go there more often. We need to unmeasure time, to be an I falling through the world, discovering loss and elegance. The late anthropologist Keith Basso, who lived among the Sibique Apache for a long time, took down the words of a woman who lived in a place called Rotten Field, but she might as well have been living in a place called Rotten Ice. And this is what she said. Wisdom sits in places. It's like water that never dries. You need to drink the water to stay alive. And you also need to drink from places. You must remember everything about them. You must learn their names. You must remember what happened at them long ago. Then your mind will become smoother and smoother. Then you will see danger before it happens. You will walk a long way and live a long time. You will become wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretel. That was amazing. You really have given us many reasons to care. So we have some time for questions or comments. I would ask that if you're going to ask a question, raise your hand. You need to use a microphone that we're recording this, so that if you see this again or share it with your friends, please go to the Tiki Center YouTube channel and we'll post this as soon as we can. So also, following the presentation, our good friends from the Norwich Bookstore are out in the lobby with a number of Gretel's books, so if you'd like to purchase a copy, any other signs have that opportunity. So, question? Yeah.
Good luck, everyone. No. Yes.
Would it be possible for you to put the map up that was showing there and
Sure.
Just talk a little bit about that? Because it was just flashing by, and it'd be nice to kind of get oriented.
It's not the map of the whole, it's really a map of the Jakobshavn glacier outlet at Ilulissat where we met.
Yes.
So those are all icebergs coming out. The terminus of the glacier is way, way back. But it's now, it's so ironic we talk about glacial speed, but now these glaciers are, they are calving like crazy. and at the same time retreating. It's a strange thing to try to understand how a glacier works, but it's sort of giving itself away. And these icebergs come out into the what is that, the Davis Strait? What is it? Yeah. And the currents push them kind of north, and then they go out and they wander around. And of course they're beautiful, but everything is different now. When I first started coming to Greenland, the icebergs were, way bigger and kind of sharp. They have these fantastic architectural shapes. Every architect should go look at icebergs for a while. And now the arms of the icebergs are kind of rounded, and they're dripping underneath. And I mean, not just in late summer, but in spring too. And then the top of while we were in Ilulissat, that in 2013, we took a plane and just flew over the ice sheet. And it was Connie Steffen who mentioned, and I agreed with him, that when in the old days, the top of the ice sheet was, it had crevasses, but it was smooth and it was big. It was really like a big plane of ice, a big hump. And now, Lee, could you maybe go forward or backwards, or where are you? Somewhere. There are some pictures, not that, taken from the top of the ice sheet. It looks like a huge hammer has hit it, and it's just completely chopped up because it's moving so fast. I think it's after this. That's pretty soon. Anyway, it's just amazing to see the change. Yeah, back there? Yes, hi, Terry.
Thank you so much for your beautiful language. Thank you so much, Gretel, for your beautiful language. And you've been writing about this before anyone even held a consciousness. And I'm curious about what you know as a witness and traveling with Arctic people, and how you accommodate this as, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, but as a Buddhist, is my understanding of your spiritual practice that you've written about, with the notion of impermanence and advocacy.
That's a nice little question. Thanks, Terry. Well, impermanence is king. I mean, because practice is I think the Greenland hunters I've traveled with all these years are the real practitioners, because they live the body and soul and mind of impermanence every day. That's what has shaped them. So I just feel that I've learned from them how to behave, they until this, most recent years, they've been the most joyful, exuberant, funny, gallows humor, sort of wild and woolly without at the same time being sort of quiet people, but just, a sense of the joy of life, because they know how easy it is to lose it. Because the ice, long before the climate started ravaging the Arctic, was always a dangerous place. It's the most dynamic surface there is. It's always moving, always changing, and people disappear through the ice all the time. That's not really new. It's just gotten more dangerous. So, that's the top of the ice sheet. So, it's complicated, because although they've grown up with the sense that things are changing, they are remarkably agile in body and mind. But at the same time, they don't want to adapt out of their culture. We talk a lot about adaptation and resilience and everything, but this is a culture that started, 25,000 years ago in Siberia and went all the way across. They didn't know there was anything else except ice. And so we're talking about a community of people and animals that has co-evolved in the ice landscape, and there really isn't anything else for them. For the younger generation, it's a different story. They'll go on, as we did, from wherever we're indigenous from. Bad grammar, sorry. But, you know, they'll move on and become modern people in their own way. But my friends there who are in their 40s and 50s won't. Why would they? They won't do it. So you have to, I think it's really important when we talk about adaptation. You know, humans are just absurdly adaptable. I mean, we're also absurdly corruptible. I think it's sort of two sides of the same coin. And, but you also have to respect the power of a culture that's thousands of years old, that has been the same for thousands of years in a certain way. They're still kind of Ice Age people living, you know, they now have cell phones that work within the sight range of their village, and they love them, but they're still using Ice Age implements to get their food. So you really have to respect that. So it's a complex thing of, you know, honoring who they are, and it's been very painful for me to witness the death of this culture that I came to revere and to love. And they were, you know, I went there thinking that, I mean, feeling so happy that they were so accepting of me and kind to me, and humored me along as I blundered around on the ice. And now they're kind of, they depend on me in a certain way as a witness for the death of their culture, and to tell the world that this is important, that, you know, what we're losing is just another big chunk, just as big as the Petermann Glacier, a chunk of culture, a chunk of language, a chunk of knowing the world that will never be seen again. And it's important and sad. Yes.
I was wondering, the people the wonderful people who live in this region, they realize what is going on. Do they understand fully the why this is happening? I assume they probably do know why it's happening. How do they feel about us? Us,
Yeah.
who are making this
Happen.
happen to them,
So
to help to, you know, bring down their wonderful, beautiful culture,
Right.
by our actions. So I guess it's two questions. Do they realize the cause, and who is doing it, and how do they feel about the people who are doing it, us?
They completely realize what's happening. They keep up with the news, and sometimes I send them things, you know, from Jason Box or whoever's up there who keeps alive blog on stuff. But yes, they know exactly what's going on, but, you know, they are very elegant people. I mean, deeply elegant, so that shame and blame is not a part of their culture. And they're way too elegant to get involved in that. And to, but in 2007, that year when I went around the whole world and I ended up in Greenland, I held a meeting of the hunters and their families, any of the wives or kids who wanted to come. And I just started out the meeting sort of apologizing for all of us of what was happening. But I could do it in a, I wouldn't do it among people I didn't know, because that would be sort of obnoxious. But, I traveled with them for a long time, and so I just said, I'm so sorry. It's beyond my control. I mean, they were so cool. They're really despairing. But at the same time, they understand that it's a big, complicated world, and they're not going to waste their time being pissed off at everybody. They're going to just live as best they can. Yeah? Thanks.
This is a tougher question, if not one of the more important questions about climate change, but how do you get the people that aren't in this room or that don't see the importance in reading about what's happening or educating themselves in any way or taking courses on this material or thinking about the implications that their vote has on these issues to care about these people and to care about what's happening every single day?
Yeah, well, that's the question we ask ourselves. A lot of us, probably everyone in this room, asks themselves every day. Each of us can just do what we can. I write books and I give talks and I travel there and I come back, and my husband Neil does radio pieces about them, and that's what we can do. And we vote right. I don't mean right. Correctly, yes, we vote correctly. I did have a friend who worked in the White House and the Polar worked for John Holdren, and Brendan Kelly, and we talked a lot all the time. And I tried to get John Holdren to get the entire Obama family to Greenland and to go out on a dog set really have a real experience to sleep out on the ice, and it just didn't work. Maybe we can get Hillary out there and her grandchildren. It would be fantastic. They take little kids, and they never seen a child complain anywhere in Greenland in my life about anything. So, we just have to do what we can do. We just need to, in Wyoming, where the political atmosphere is a bit strange, I talked to people what happened at my cabin, where tree mortality is slowing down now, but is rampant. Millions of acres of lodgepole pines and other kinds of conifers and now other kinds of trees are dying. And so I try to just use a local example and say, well, why should you care about the Arctic, except that it kind of drives the weather. But if that's too big a leap for them, then you say, well, see, now these trees are gone, and now these bugs are here, and now this disease is here, and now it's affecting you. And the reason why is because we need white surfaces to radiate the sun back out to keep the rest of the world cool. And, you just make it simple without... So you just try anything you can without being too obnoxious about it. And, yeah. Yes?
The beautiful piece of writing that you shared with us is largely about change, various forms of change, but there's also glimmers of continuity in the writing. And I just wonder if you could shed a little more light on that continuity and the elements of the society in this part of the world that are staying the most the same. Mm-hmm. And another way to think of my question would be if you could imagine 50 years in the future, some of the young people in the community now being a bit older, how will they be, the same as their grandparents? In what ways?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to imagine because they won't have grown. All the young boys were trained. I knew 7-year-olds who could do everything their fathers did and just as well, but they were, held back because it was dangerous. But so they grew up with this way of life and the moral sort of realm of the villages and how to behave towards the animals. And when that goes away, for example, I asked Jens when he was in Paris with us, because he's talked to me a lot about the polar bear spirit that keeps visiting him. And I said, well, when the ice goes, will there be a polar bear spirit? Where will the polar bear spirit go? And he said he didn't know. So I think that's my answer to your question, because, look at us. We all came from somewhere in the world. Well, Africa originally, and then all the iterations of travel and birth and death since then. But we don't really have, I mean, most of us here who came from European stock don't know who we are in that sense, in the sense that Greenlanders know who they are. So I don't know 50 years from now what will happen. I hope they can retain, you know, what Sheila Cloutier calls the survival kit of, you know, patience and generosity and discipline, self-discipline and physical strength and, you know, all the things you need to live in a society that can only thrive. And this is what E.O. Wilson says too, that in the future we're going to have to work collaboratively. We're going to have to work altruistically. When he said that word, I burst out laughing, and he said, "Don't laugh at me. There's going to be." What I mean is, we need to learn to not work solely as individuals, but we need to work together. And as Jens's wife said, we all have our differences. We just keep ours inside. And I think maybe I hope those kids retain that in a sense of that wonderful spirit of joy and a sense of beauty and a sense of natural communalism that they came out of. Because I think those will be skills that will take us into the future in a good way.
Hi. So I realized that throughout the story, we live through like the dreams and the imagination and disappointment of the Arctic people. But I wanted to know more about you and how you felt. Like you said, the Greenlanders know who they are, but we don't. So I want to know like what's on your mind. What do you think about when you're there? Like if you could put it like maybe in one word, like is it inevitability, sadness, you're lost? Like what's your place in this story?
Well, in the old story, I was just totally happy when I was there all the time, 24 hours a day. Now I'm as despairing as they are. That's all. You know, I mean, I'm still, when we're all together and we're, you know, sharing a moment together, or if there is ice and if we get out on it, there is a sort of ephemeral happiness, but it's really different now.
Lovejoy, in his book Gaia, suggested we should plant daisies all over the world to replicate the ice age.
You mean in his last book?
I don't know what it
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of love. Yeah, well, okay. Well, you start and send the seeds around. Yes, maybe they'll be great farmers in the future. Sienna?
Gretel, I was wondering if you could... You've mentioned language at various intervals in your talk, and I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that, both how you managed without language and then came to have language, and
didn't come to have language.
But also the intergenerational question, right? Language is always tied to place in so many ways, here especially it seems, but with the younger generation, what are the different push-pull factors that are making them lose language, and is there a movement against that even if the ice is going away?
Yeah, they're completely fluent. It's the only Arctic nation, well, except for the Komi people, all 14 of them, that are completely fluent in their language. Nobody speaks Danish unless they're forced to, and then they claim they don't really remember how to speak it at all, and they probably don't. So language is just there, and it's still, and it's spoken everywhere in Greenland. It doesn't matter whether you're in the north or the south. So I think that's going to really stay in place. I think the words there will be words that drop away because you're not hunting. I mean, maybe they won't, or they'll become archaic, or they'll be, a reference to something in the past, but I think that will really help sustain a changing culture, because in Alaska, it's just over. I mean, people barely, I mean, there are little pockets of people who might speak a dialect, but mostly it's English, and it's really sad for them. I didn't really learn Greenlandic. You must have noticed that in Paris. I know a whole lot of words. I'm good at remembering nouns, because I'm a writer. You know, I name things. I spent many weeks and months on the ice with no common language, but you know, I sort of forgot about it because we're just looking at things and we're doing things, and as if any of you have camped or backpacked or anything, you know that you don't have to talk that much when you're out there, and you know you have a routine for how you do things. And you know, like that one day when it was 59 below zero, I was helping unpack the sled, only I couldn't move my fingers at all. I was completely frozen, and I was unpacking the sled like this, thinking no one would notice, and then Jens says, and he takes me inside the hut and turns on the Prima stove and warms up a towel. So anyway, he started massaging my hands. He never said anything, but then later, when I had a translator in the village, he said, you know, frostbite is like a ghost. It comes up on you when you're not expecting it. You have to be very careful, you know. So the powers of observation when you don't have a common language are extravagant. They're just wonderful, and it covers a lot of ground, and there's lots of sign language and laughter about things. Like, you know, my first question was, where do I go to the bathroom? And they point over to a piece of rough ice, you know, over there.
Let me take a last question here. Bruce Forbes up front.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. You mentioned resilience in passing, and because you were based at Ilulissat, I was thinking of that. That is actually an ancient site with the layers of Inuit, Thule, and Dorset cultures there. So actually, there's been settled people using marine mammals in that area with different technology and different suites of mammals for a long time. And I'm more familiar with the other side of Davis Strait on Baffin Island, where the bowhead whales have finally started to come back in the 1980s. You know, they were fished out in the 16th and 17th century. And I'm wondering, are any of the whales coming back up in that region, and are people thinking the way they are in Baffin Island that they could become whale hunters again? They were whale hunters.
Yeah, not that I know of. There's always beluga whales there.
And you mentioned the narwhal.
And narwhal, of course. Yeah. And now narwhal are showing up in Alaska. But
that's part of resilience, is that people, you know, functions change, but people
if there's anything
that's
edible, they'll figure it out. Yeah. You know, because even now in the worst of ice, like one day there'll be ice and the next day, but they'll go out hunting at any moment they can. And also Mamre, who until recently had become the strongest hunter of the family group, was going up over the ice sheet by himself with his dog sled into a distant valley to hunt muskox, so which they had never done before. But it was so weird to come into the village and see, instead of polar bear skins and seal skins on their drying racks, you see big horns and these big shaggy hides. So they, you know, they're certainly adaptable in that way. But they say, you know, we don't want to become bankers and fishermen, you know, on some big trawler. That's not us. We're not doing that. So.
I think we all want to thank Gretel for an amazing foray into the far north. And I'll be traveling this summer twice to Greenland. The second trip is with a group of Dartmouth alumni. We're going to go from Calumet across Davis Strait to Lewisat. The Dartmouth president will be with us. And they sent me a list of things that they should read. And they had all these books here that I went down through them. So I'm missing something very important. So, you know, your book on northern Greenland, actually more than one book, are on that list now. So
good.
we're going to
Thank you.
spread the word to that.
And I'm going to stow away with you.
Yes, join us. Use the calendar here today, August 1. There are books outside here, Gretel's books. Support a writer, support the local bookstore, Norris Books. So if you want to have more questions, why don't we turn to the lobby here?